What rule did your teacher break? I was sitting in music class when that familiar warning crept into my fingers. A soft buzzing that always meant trouble. I had been seizure-free for months, but my body was giving me the signal again. I raised my hand and told the substitute that I needed to get to the nurse right away, my voice already shaking as I explained I was about to have a seizure. She barely looked at me and rolled her eyes like I had asked for a bathroom break. She said every kid suddenly claimed to have epilepsy these days and that it was some kind of trend. I tried again and told her I had a seizure action plan on file and that I only had minutes before I lost control of my body, but she told me to sit down and walked over to my desk. Instead of helping, she leaned in close and started telling me a story about her sister, ignoring her own daughter's fake seizures until they magically stopped. The tingling was crawling up my arm and panic was rising in my chest as my friend Emily jumped up and ran toward the emergency button near the door. She shouted that I was not faking and that she had seen my seizures before. The substitute blocked her path and said the only thing seizing was my need for attention. Then she did something I will never forget. She walked to the door, turned the deadbolt, slipped the key into her pocket, and said no one was leaving until I admitted I was lying. Someone yelled to call 911 and reached for their phone, but the substitute grabbed the phone box and threatened everyone with suspension if they did not hand their devices over. My vision started to blur at the edges and I knew I was running out of time as the room filled with whispers and fear. My cousin Tyler opened his mouth and said I had been faking seizures since I was little. I felt something inside me break as the substitute smiled like she had just been handed proof. She said even my boyfriend knew I was performing and turned toward the She pulled up a video site and started searching for flashing strobe lights. She said exposure therapy helped fake seizures and that if I were really epileptic she would never do this. The screen erupted into violent flashes of white and black and my brain felt like it was being ripped apart. Emily screamed for her to turn it off and tried to explain that photosensitive epilepsy was real, but the substitute cranked the brightness higher and said it was all Then another student named Jason grabbed his head and collapsed, his body stiffening as the lights continued to pulse. Suddenly, kids were diving under desks and covering their faces. Others were screaming for it to stop. Malik tried to shield my eyes with his hands while begging me not to seize. Ryan slammed his shoulder into the locked door calling for help. The substitute laughed and threatened expulsion. More students were on the floor now, some crying, some vomiting, the chaos spreading as the strobe triggered migraines and panic attacks across the room through the narrow window in the door. Mr. Peters from the classroom next door glanced in. The substitute stepped in front of the glass and gave him a thumbs up before pulling the shade down. He walked away and left us trapped. Emily screamed that I only had a minute left. My muscles began to twitch as my consciousness started slipping. The substitute actually increased the strobe speed and started ranting about how social media had made everyone neurodivergent. Then my body gave up. The seizure hit like lightning and I was gone. Later my friend Sarah told me what happened next. How my body thrashed violently and foam gathered at my mouth. How I turned blue while she tried to roll me on my side and screamed that I was dying. My blood was on her hands from where I bit my tongue. The substitute stood there eating an apple and commented on my performance. That was when a quiet kid named Ben snapped. He grabbed a music stand and charged the substitute started recording him and shouting about felonies as he smashed the screen. Glass exploded everywhere. Another student was seizing nearby and someone else was vomiting. The room had turned into a nightmare. My boyfriend Aaron saw me through the shattered window and lost control. He cut his hand, reaching through the glass, and fought for the lock while Emily and Ben held the substitute back. The door finally flew open, and teachers flooded in yelling for someone to call 911. The substitute kept screaming that we were all faking and that it was mass hysteria. Paramedics arrived and later told me I had been clinically dead for 90 seconds. They intubated me in the hallway while working on Jason just feet away. It turned out he had undiagnosed epilepsy and did not survive. The substitute was placed on paid leave while her actions were reviewed. Parents set up fundraisers to cover medical bills. 2 weeks later, we were in science class when the announcement came that Jason had died because his family could not raise enough money for treatment. My hands shook so badly I could not hold my pencil. The teacher kept talking about cell division while all I could think about was how Jason's cells had stopped dividing forever. Rage burned through me until I ran to the bathroom and vomited. Emily followed me and whispered that we could not let this go. That night I could not sleep and replayed the moment I died over and over, wondering if Jason had felt the same darkness in the days that followed. Flowers piled up at Jason's locker and people left notes and stuffed animals. A younger student asked what happened and said it sounded fake when someone explained. At lunch, I sat with Ben who still had bandages on his hands and haunted eyes. After school, Erin showed me printed screenshots of the substitute's social media before she locked it down. Posts mocking disabled kids and praising tough love approaches to fake seizures. Every word made me sick. Jason's funeral was packed and his mother clutched my hand until it hurt, whispering about how $30,000 was not enough to save her son. In the parking lot afterward, I confronted Tyler and asked how he could say I was faking. He broke down and admitted our grandmother had convinced him of it for years. Sorry did not bring Jason back. The following Monday, the principal met with my parents and spoke only about procedures and protocols, never saying Jason's name without glancing at her lawyer. Later, the district coordinator reviewed my accommodation plan with fake sympathy, asking what they could have done differently as if the answer was not obvious. Something about the substitute's actions felt calculated, like she knew exactly which buttons to push. And as I left that office, I knew nothing would change unless we forced it to. That realization was where everything truly began. Not with anger alone, but with a resolve that settled deep in my chest. Emily and Ben and Aaron and I started talking about what we could actually do. We went to the police station and sat for hours while a detective spoke in careful language about alleged incidents and ongoing investigations. His words felt hollow with Jason's death certificate sitting right there. Days later, a trip to the mall nearly triggered another seizure when flickering lights sent me spiraling back into that classroom. The following week, a student journalist asked for an interview, and I said no because I was not ready to have my words twisted. Instead, I stayed home organizing every medical record and email and plan the school had ignored, copying everything into binders and flash drives. Jason's fundraiser stayed frozen at $30,000 and the world kept moving on. That was when the anger turned into something sharper, something that would not let me stay quiet anymore. The days after that decision blurred together, but the weight never lifted. Every hallway felt heavier and every flickering light sent my heart racing. My parents checked on me constantly, afraid the stress would trigger another seizure. My mom would hover in doorways and my dad watched me breathe like he was afraid I would disappear again. At school, the flowers at Jason's locker kept growing while whispers followed me everywhere. Some kids looked at me with sympathy while others avoided me completely, like grief was contagious. I kept replaying the substitute's calm face in my head and the way the door had clicked shut. It felt deliberate, and that thought refused to let me rest. Emily stayed glued to my side, and Ben barely spoke, but his eyes said enough. We all knew pretending this would fade away was not an option anymore. That weekend, we met in my basement and spread everything out on the floor. Hospital bracelets, printed screenshots, handwritten notes of what each of us remembered. Malik sketched a rough timeline while Emily texted classmates asking them to write down their memories before time dulled them. Aaron showed up late and sat on the stairs checking his phone over and over. When Emily asked what was wrong, he admitted his coach warned him to stay out of it or risk his scholarship. The words landed like a slap and the room went quiet. I understood what he was saying, but it still hurt that protecting his future came with a price I was not willing to pay. We kept working anyway because stopping felt worse than the tension hanging in the air. Emily suggested we file public records requests, and we spent hours drafting them carefully, asking for hallway camera footage, incident reports, emergency call logs, anything official that could not be brushed aside as rumors. When the district replied, saying everything was part of an ongoing investigation and could not be released due to privacy laws, it felt like a wall slamming down in front of us. That was when Emily's mom mentioned a civil rights attorney she knew, a woman named Olivia Grant who worked downtown. We met her in an office lined with awards and framed photos, and she listened without interrupting, while we told everything from the tingling in my fingers to Jason collapsing on the floor. When we finished, she said she would help us if we stayed organized and followed her rules exactly. Olivia was calm and precise, and that steadiness helped ground me. She told us to screenshot every post related to the incident before it disappeared, to write down our memories in detail while they were still sharp, to gather witness contact information but never contact the substitute directly. No messages, no confrontations, nothing that could be twisted against us. Having clear instructions made the chaos feel manageable. We created a group chat that night and divided tasks. Emily would collect statements, Ben would organize documents, Malik would refine the timeline. I focused on tracking my symptoms and writing everything I remembered minute by minute. It felt like building something solid out of all the broken pieces. The next morning, the principal's voice came over the intercom during homeroom, and the room went silent. She announced that any student participating in walkouts or protests during school hours would face automatic suspension and removal from extracurriculars. The message was wrapped in words about order and respect, but the threat was clear. My phone buzzed nonstop under my desk as messages flooded the group chat. No one wanted to back down now. Third period was when we planned it, and fear was not enough to stop us anymore. When the bell rang, I turned toward the main entrance instead of class and saw Emily and Malik already there with a small crowd forming. Security tried to block us, but numbers pushed past them and we spilled out into the parking lot. Together we stood on the front lawn in silence for Jason. No signs, no chance, just a group of students refusing to pretend nothing had happened. Cars honked as they passed, and some teachers watched from doorways without intervening. After 20 minutes we walked back inside and returned to class like nothing happened. By the end of the day, detention slips waited in our lockers like warnings. 2 weeks of after-school detention, in red ink. It felt almost laughable compared to what we had already lived through. That night, my cousin Tyler made everything worse by posting an old video of me laughing at a family barbecue years ago. He captioned it like proof I had always been fine and was only seeking attention. The betrayal cut deep because he knew it was a good day between seizures and he twisted it anyway. Within an hour, the video spread, and strangers filled the comments with cruelty, saying Jason's death was my fault and that I created drama. I threw my phone across my room and listened to it crack against the wall. The next morning, Aaron confronted Tyler in the hallway and slammed him into lockers before teachers pulled them apart. Both ended up suspended, and Aaron's mom had to leave work to get him. He texted me that night saying it was worth it, but guilt sat heavy in my chest, knowing his instinct to protect me was costing him more than he admitted. A few days later, I agreed to speak with a student journalist after refusing repeatedly. We met in an empty classroom, and I set strict boundaries. My voice shook, but I stuck to the facts about the strobe lights, the locked door, and Jason. When it was over, I felt hollow but relieved that the truth existed somewhere outside my head. The Article went live that night, and the response was brutal and divided. Support poured in alongside accusations of hysteria and attention-seeking. Reading strangers debate whether Jason's death mattered made me physically sick, and my mom found me curled on the bathroom floor shaking. The next day Olivia called with unexpected news. One of the paramedics who worked on me that day wanted to help and would testify if formally subpoenaed. His memory of the classroom and how long it took to revive me could matter. Hope flickered briefly before being smothered again when we read Mr. Peters' deposition, claiming he saw nothing wrong through the window and walked away. Knowing an adult was that close and chose not to look shattered something inside me. That same afternoon Malik found an old blog the substitute had forgotten to delete. Post after post dismissed neurodivergent kids as coddled and accused parents of enabling fake conditions. We captured everything and added it to the growing evidence folder. Olivia sent preservation letters demanding electronic logs be saved, and suddenly everything felt real in a way group chats never could. The next morning letters from the teachers' union appeared, warning students about defamation and legal consequences. Fear rippled through the halls as kids deleted posts and whispered about lawsuits. Emily tore her letter in half in front of everyone, and the anger spread. Later that day, a grocery store self-checkout light triggered another episode, and my mom had to guide me out while people stared. The triggers were getting worse, and normal life felt increasingly dangerous. Aaron started escorting me everywhere, watching me like I might shatter, and after days of it, I finally snapped and told him I needed space. We argued in the parking lot about protection and control, and neither of us walked away feeling like we won. That same week, leaked emails from the administration surfaced discussing optics and liability without mentioning Jason once. The corporate language made my stomach turn, and Olivia said it was exactly the kind of evidence we needed. The school board meeting that night was packed, and we each spoke for 2 minutes. My voice cracked saying Jason's name, but I finished. Hearing laughter from some parents hurt almost as much as the silence from others. Promises of future training felt empty when help had come too late. We filed a federal complaint with the Office for Civil Rights and were told it could take 18 months. The delay felt unbearable, but Olivia insisted the paper trail mattered. Rumors at school grew nastier, and someone wrote drama queen on my locker. Isolation settled in as sharply as grief. Emily showed up one night sobbing after her parents threatened her college prospects, but she promised she was not leaving. Mr. Peters later admitted his guilt and asked how to help, and I told him to testify when the time came. Days later, an official letter arrived acknowledging our complaint and giving it a case number. Seeing it in writing made everything feel heavier and more real. The next morning, a small unlabeled flash drive fell from my locker, and when I watched the grainy hallway footage at lunch showing chaos behind the classroom door, my hands shook. Someone inside the school was trying to help us, and that knowledge changed everything. Holding that flash drive felt like holding a live wire. My hands shook as Emily leaned closer, and we replayed the video again and again. The footage was grainy but clear enough to show students diving under desks and a body convulsing on the floor while the substitute stood motionless. It was proof that could not be argued away as hysteria. Olivia answered when we called, and her voice turned serious immediately. She told us not to copy it or share it and to bring it to her office as soon as possible. Chain of custody mattered, and one mistake could ruin everything. Someone inside the school had taken a risk to get this to us, and we could not waste that sacrifice. The rest of the day passed in a blur, and every face in the hallway looked suspicious. Anyone could have been the one who slipped it into my locker that afternoon my mom drove me to Jason's house, where his mother was waiting with red eyes and trembling hands. She led us to his bedroom, which looked frozen in time, with textbooks open and college applications stacked neatly on his desk. She told me she had hired her own lawyer to pursue a civil case against the district and the substitute. She asked if I would testify, and I agreed without hesitation because Jason deserved someone to speak for him. She showed me his journal where he wrote about wanting to become a doctor to help kids with neurological conditions. Reading his words made my chest ache but also strengthened my resolve. This was no longer just about what happened to me. It was about honoring the future. He never got to have. A few days later, Aaron asked to talk privately, and we sat in his car after school. He stared at the steering wheel while explaining his scholarship was at risk, and his coach warned him to stay quiet. He said he loved me but could not jeopardize his entire future. I understood why he felt trapped, but it still felt like losing him in slow motion. When he dropped me off, I watched his car disappear, and knew things between us would never be the same. The loss settled alongside everything else like another weight I had to carry. Therapy appointments started that week, and I filled out endless forms about triggers and symptoms. Accepting that flashing lights and stress would always be dangerous felt like mourning another version of myself. That weekend, Emily called in a panic about a fake account using my name and photo that posted screenshots of my medical records with cruel captions. Someone had violated my privacy and exposed my diagnosis and medication list to the internet. Even after reporting it, the images spread through group chats faster than we could stop them. Olivia advised me to take control of the narrative by recording my own statement. It took hours to get through the timeline without breaking down, but eventually, I recorded a calm, detailed explanation of what happened that day and posted it. Pressing upload was terrifying but also empowering. Within days, a local news reporter reached out and ran a segment that included my video and interviews with other parents. Tips poured in about the substitute's behavior at previous schools, and suddenly this was bigger than our town police. Interviews followed, and Olivia sat beside me as I answered detailed questions about every minute of that day. Writing everything down made it feel clinical but necessary. The substitute refused to speak on advice of her lawyer, and Olivia said that silence spoke volumes. Soon after, an information technology specialist from the district confirmed that smartboard logs showed a strobe video played at maximum brightness during the exact window of the incident under the substitute's login. Seeing that confirmation tightened my chest, even though it brought no comfort. A certified letter arrived offering a settlement that would cover my medical bills in exchange for silence. The money was tempting, but the non-disclosure agreement felt like erasing Jason. Accepting it would mean agreeing to forget, and I could not do that. We met at Malik's garage to talk through the offers, and emotions ran high. Some families needed the money desperately, while others argued taking it meant letting the district win. The debate grew heated until the stress made me dizzy and everyone stopped to make sure I was okay. The next day, the principal pulled me from class to pitch a restorative justice circle where the substitute would apologize and we would heal together. The timing felt manipulative, and I refused. Walking out before my anger got me suspended. Olivia later confirmed the district was offering different settlement amounts to divide us and urged us to stand together. Knowing Jason's mother was fighting to gave me strength to refuse the offer, despite the fear. Preparation for depositions consumed the next weeks. Olivia drilled me on staying calm and answering only what was asked. She even planned for what would happen if I had a seizure during testimony, so it could not be dismissed as fake. Hearing the substitute's deposition summary made my blood boil. She doubled down on claims of mass hysteria and defended the strobe as exposure therapy. When asked about Jason, she called his death an unfortunate coincidence unrelated to her actions. I had to leave the office and walk around the block to calm myself. Mr. Peters testified next and broke down, admitting he assumed everything was fine because the substitute looked calm. His remorse seemed genuine, but it did not undo the harm. The superintendent spent hours framing the incident as unavoidable while distancing the district from responsibility. Tyler's deposition followed, and he spoke about our grandmother convincing him for years that I was faking. Hearing how deeply that lie had taken root explained his cruelty but did not excuse it. Back at school, the atmosphere shifted again. Some students apologized for not helping, while others whispered that we were exaggerating for money. Purple ribbons appeared for Jason, alongside eye rolls, and arguments broke out in the parking lot. Months passed before the court date where a judge ordered seizure response training for staff, but refused to fire the substitute immediately. Due process felt hollow when she still drew a salary. Eventually, the district offered a broader settlement, including a memorial fund for epilepsy research and reforms to training. The substitute agreed to resign with her license under review. It was something, but it did not feel like justice. My neurologist confirmed my seizure threshold had dropped from prolonged stress, and increased medication became necessary. That was when I ended my relationship with Aaron because I could not handle more pressure. Emily helped me start a disability advocacy group at school, and sharing space with others facing similar struggles gave me purpose. One weekend I visited Jason's grave with his mother, and we sat in silence watching the clouds. Nothing needed to be said. Later, I wrote an article for the local paper outlining systemic failures and proposing changes without attacking individuals. Reading it aloud to my parents, I realized I was not healed, but I was learning how to live with the damage, carrying it forward instead of letting it consume me. The response to the article was quieter than the chaos that came before, but it lingered in a different way. Teachers avoided my eyes in the hallway, and some students suddenly wanted to talk while others pretended I did not exist. The advocacy group meetings grew from a handful of kids to dozens, and every story shared sounded painfully familiar. Ignored insulin alarms, mocked tics, asthma inhalers taken away during tests. It became clear that what happened in that music room was not an isolated moment but part of a pattern that thrived on disbelief. Each meeting ended with a mix of anger and relief because speaking the truth out loud felt dangerous but also necessary. We began drafting a proposal for the school board that outlined specific changes we wanted. Not vague promises, but concrete steps that could not be brushed aside later. At the same time, the legal process kept grinding forward slowly and relentlessly. Olivia warned us that this phase would test our patience more than anything else. Motions were filed and responses delayed, and every envelope in the mail made my heart jump. Jason's mother called often, and we talked less about strategy and more about ordinary things like weather and recipes, because sometimes that was all either of us could handle. She told me how quiet the house felt without him, and how she still set an extra plate at dinner out of habit. Hearing that made the cost of everything painfully clear and reminded me why silence was never an option. Even when exhaustion tempted me to disappear, school became a battlefield of whispers and stares. Detention afternoons stretched endlessly as I sat in a room with others who had walked out for Jason. Some of us talked softly while others stared at the wall, lost in their own thoughts. One afternoon, a teacher supervising detention apologized under her breath and said she wished she had done more that day. It was the first time an adult acknowledged failure without hiding behind procedure, and it caught me off guard. That small admission mattered more than she probably realized. It showed that accountability did not have to be forced with subpoenas alone. The district announced new interim training sessions for staff and substitute teachers and framed it as proactive leadership. The language felt hollow, but the changes were tangible. Posters outlining emergency response steps appeared in classrooms, and nurses visited homerooms to explain medical protocols. Some students rolled their eyes, but others listened intently. I watched a freshman with a visible tremor relax when the nurse explained seizure first aid clearly and without judgment. Moments like that made the fight feel worthwhile even as the larger questions of responsibility remained unresolved. Media attention ebbed and flowed, and with it came renewed waves of scrutiny. Local radio shows debated whether the substitute had been unfairly targeted, and callers argued about teenage exaggeration. Each broadcast felt like reopening a wound, but I forced myself to keep listening because understanding how people minimized harm helped me counter it later. Olivia said narrative mattered just as much as evidence, and that we had to be prepared for backlash whenever progress was made. She was right, and the backlash arrived in subtle ways. Anonymous notes slipped into lockers. Social media posts hinting that some of us were enjoying the spotlight. It hurt, but it no longer surprised me. Therapy became a fixed point in my week, and slowly I learned to recognize the early signs of panic separate from seizure warnings. Breathing exercises did not fix everything, but they gave me a sense of agency. My therapist helped me grieve not only Jason but the version of myself that existed before that classroom door locked. Accepting that loss felt like letting go of something fragile. But it also freed up space to imagine a future shaped by advocacy instead of fear. Some days that future felt distant, and others it felt within reach. The settlement negotiations stretched on, and Olivia prepared us for the possibility of trial, despite the district's public statements about resolution. She explained how institutions often try to outlast individuals, counting on fatigue to do their work for them. That knowledge fueled our determination to stay united. Group chats buzzed late into the night with updates and encouragement, and sometimes simple messages reminding each other to eat or sleep. Solidarity became both strategy and survival. Jason's memorial fund was announced publicly, and the district framed it as a gesture of goodwill. The amount sounded impressive in headlines, but Jason's mother told me quietly that money felt abstract compared to the empty chair in her living room. Still, she agreed to attend the press conference because visibility mattered. I stood beside her, holding her hand as cameras flashed and reporters asked careful questions. She spoke with a steadiness I could only admire, and when she said her son's name, the crowd fell silent. That silence felt more powerful than applause. After the conference, the superintendent approached me and thanked me for my courage, in a tone that felt rehearsed. I nodded politely and said nothing because there were no words that could bridge the gap between us. Later, Olivia said moments like that were about optics and not substance, and that I should not internalize them. Learning to separate genuine remorse from performative concern became another skill I never asked for but had to master. It was exhausting, but it protected me from false hope. Pat School, the advocacy group, presented our proposal to the board during a packed meeting. Students shared testimonies, and parents echoed our demands for accountability. I spoke last and focused on systems rather than individuals, explaining how disbelief created danger and how simple changes could save lives. The board listened and asked questions and promised to review our recommendations. Promises had lost their shine, but the public record mattered. Seeing our words entered into minutes felt like staking a claim that could not be erased. Quietly later, behind the scenes, Olivia continued pushing the legal case forward and prepared us for depositions from additional witnesses. Each preparation session reopened memories but also strengthened my ability to tell the story without breaking. She reminded me often that composure did not mean lack of emotion, but control over how it was used. That distinction helped me reclaim my narrative from those who wanted to reduce it to hysteria or drama. Every rehearsal was a step toward that control. Winter approached. The anniversary of the incident loomed, and anxiety spiked across our group. We planned a vigil on the front lawn with candles and silence, rather than speeches. The administration approved it reluctantly, and security hovered nearby. Students gathered in the cold, holding lights that flickered softly without triggering alarms. Standing there together, I felt the weight of the year settle into something steadier. Grief had not disappeared, but it had transformed into resolve. A shared understanding that forgetting was not an option. That night after the vigil, I went home and slept deeply for the first time in months. The dreams were still heavy, but they no longer pulled me under. Waking up, I realized that healing was not a straight line, and justice was not a single moment, but a process that demanded endurance. Part of me longed for closure, while another part understood that the work was still unfolding. The legal case had not reached its final chapter, and the cultural shifts we sought were fragile and unfinished. As the year drew to a close, I knew the next phase would test us in new ways, and that the outcome would shape not only our school but how we carried this story forward into the world. The final months of the year moved slowly and all at once. Every day carried the echo of that locked classroom, but also the quiet momentum of change that refused to stop. The legal case reached its last stretch, and Olivia warned us this phase would be the hardest, because resolution often came wrapped in disappointment. Hearings were scheduled and postponed, and each delay tested our patience. Jason's mother stayed steady even when exhaustion showed in her eyes. She told me that fighting was the only way she knew how to keep her son present in the world, that letting the process end quietly would feel like losing him a second time. Her strength anchored me when my own resolve wavered under the weight of everything we had carried for so long. When the final court date arrived, the room felt heavy with expectation. Parents filled the benches, and reporters lined the back wall. I sat beside Emily and Ben with my hands folded tightly to keep them from shaking. The judge reviewed evidence that now felt painfully familiar. The hallway footage, the smartboard logs, the witness testimonies that described chaos and disbelief. When Jason's name was spoken, the room went silent every time. The substitute did not look at us once, and her lawyer spoke in careful phrases about intent and misunderstanding. Olivia responded with precision, laying out how actions mattered more than excuses. Listening to it all felt surreal, like watching a story that belonged to someone else. Even though every word cut close to home, the ruling came later than we expected, and not in the way anyone hoped for, completely. The judge acknowledged the harm done and the failures that allowed it, but stopped short of assigning criminal liability. Civil penalties were affirmed and the settlement terms were finalized. Mandatory training became permanent policy and oversight committees were established with parent and student representation. The substitute's resignation and license review were upheld. It was not the sweeping justice many wanted, but it was tangible and binding and could not be quietly undone. Jason's mother cried softly beside me, not from relief but from the release of months spent holding herself together. I held her hand and understood that justice did not feel like victory so much as survival. In the days that followed, reactions were mixed. Some called the outcome fair while others said it was too lenient. I learned quickly that no resolution would ever satisfy everyone. What mattered was that the truth was now part of the official record and could not be erased or reframed as hysteria. The advocacy group continued meeting and shifted focus toward implementation, ensuring policies were followed rather than forgotten once attention moved on. We worked with administrators to review emergency drills and signage, and I was surprised by how many teachers genuinely wanted to learn and do better. Change felt fragile but real in those moments, and that mattered more than grand statements. Personally, healing came in uneven waves. My seizures remained more frequent than before, and medication adjustments became routine. Some days, I mourned the ease I once had moving through the world without scanning every room for flickering lights. Therapy helped me grieve that loss honestly rather than pretending resilience meant indifference. My therapist reminded me that adaptation was not weakness, and that my body had survived something profound. Accepting that truth allowed me to extend compassion to myself instead of constant frustration. Slowly I began to trust my own strength, again, not as invincibility but as persistence. My relationship with Aaron never recovered, and eventually we stopped trying to bridge the distance between us. There was no dramatic ending, just an understanding that our paths had diverged under pressure neither of us could control. Letting go hurt, but it also freed space for friendships that had been forged in fire and honesty. Emily remained my constant, and Ben found his voice through advocacy work. Malik pursued journalism, inspired by everything he had witnessed. Seeing how each of us carried the experience forward differently helped me believe that meaning could grow from even the most painful roots. Approached, and with it the fear of leaving the place where everything had happened. Part of me wanted to escape and never look back, while another part felt responsible for what came next. Jason's mother encouraged me to choose my future without guilt and reminded me that honoring her son did not mean sacrificing my own life. I applied to colleges with strong disability advocacy programs and wrote essays that spoke about systems and resilience rather than trauma alone. Sending those applications felt like reclaiming a sense of direction that had been stolen for a long time. The Memorial Fund began supporting research and student initiatives, and at the first award ceremony, a scholarship was announced in Jason's name. Watching a student accept it with tears in her eyes was bittersweet and grounding. It did not replace what was lost, but it extended his impact beyond a single tragedy. Afterward, Jason's mother hugged me and said she felt him there in the room, and for the first time her smile reached her eyes. That moment stayed with me longer than any headline or ruling on the anniversary of the incident. We gathered again on the front lawn with candles. Fewer cameras this time and more quiet understanding. Names were read aloud, and moments of silence followed each one. When Jason's name echoed across the lawn, I closed my eyes and breathed steadily, feeling grief and gratitude coexist. The administration stood at a distance and did not speak, and that felt appropriate. This moment belonged to us, and to those we remembered. As the candles burned low, I felt a sense of peace that surprised me. Not because the pain was gone, but because it no longer owned every part of me. Summer began. I wrote one last piece, not for publication but for myself. I documented the journey from disbelief to action and the lessons carved into me along the way. Writing without an audience allowed honesty without restraint and helped me see how far I had come. I was no longer defined solely by what happened in that classroom, but by what followed and by the choices I made when silence would have been easier. Closing that notebook felt like closing a chapter without pretending the story was finished. Looking ahead, I knew advocacy would remain part of my life, not as a reaction but as a calling shaped by experience. I planned to study policy and disability rights with the hope of changing systems from the inside. That vision felt ambitious and daunting but also right. Jason's dream of helping others lived on in different ways through all of us who refused to forget. Carrying that forward felt like the truest form of resolution available to using. The end justice did not arrive as a single moment of triumph, but as a series of commitments honored over time. Accountability embedded into practice rather than promised in speeches. Healing unfolded alongside grief rather than replacing it. Standing at the edge of a new beginning, I understood that survival itself could be an act of defiance and that telling the truth, even when it shook the world, was worth every cost. Jason's life mattered, and so did ours, and that truth would guide me long after this chapter ended.